Scott Moore is with us from iTalkSEC. Scott, I announced in the last segment that Tide 100.9 is going to start airing classic Alabama football games on Saturday and Sunday at 12 noon. The first one will be this Saturday, the 2008 matchup between Alabama and Clemson at the Georgia Dome. And that's kind of what started it all because,
sure did.
As I said, and you'll remember this well, Tommy Bowden had a top 10 team, a national championship contender. Alabama, we thought was going to be a lot better than Saban's first season, but nobody expected the Tide to challenge, for a national championship as they would wind up doing before losing to Florida in the SEC championship game. I think Clemson was an 8 or 9 point favorite in that game, and Alabama took them to the woodshed 34-10. And that kind of is when people said, oh, yeah, this Nick Saban thing is going to be fun. I remember that game very well. I was there. Remember C.J. Spiller and that exciting Clemson offense? In fact, their only touchdown was a C.J. Spiller kickoff return. Remember that?
Sure was. Start the third quarter. And, great memory for one. I spent most of the game on the sideline that day in Atlanta. Had to do some things for the Georgia Dome. And we go over there and do stuff for the SEC every year, and they had a kind of a kickoff event that I was part of, and so I got to spend most of the day on the sideline in that ball game. And the thing that struck me that day was when that was a great recruiting class, Saban's first great recruiting class that came in. And I remember running to Kirk Herbstreit the night before. We had done a speech together, and he came to me and he said, "Scott, have you seen Dante Hightower yet?" And I said, "Yes, I have." He goes, "That guy is unbelievable." And I said, "Kirk, the whole freaking team, it looks like a different team." So we were on the sidelines. Dennis Franchione was down there too, and Tyler Watts and I ran up to Coach Franchione. He was actually doing the game for radio. And all of us were standing there, and the thing that struck us was Alabama's physicality and what that team looked like compared to Clemson's. And I was like 30 minutes before kickoff going, look at the athletes that Alabama's got. I mean, he had Julio Jones, he had Mark Ingram, he had Marcel Darius, and then Dante Hightower. They were all true freshmen. And it was amazing. And you just kind of go, man, If Alabama passes the eye test, they could play well. And you know what? From the very first snap, Glenn Coffey, I think, ran an off tackle play, kind of right up the middle, and cut it back up for about an 18-yard gain on the first play of the game. And they kind of set the tone from that point on. And they just absolutely blasted Clemson. And you know what? It was bittersweet because Tommy Bowden didn't survive, and 8 games later, Dabo Swinney took over and became the head coach of the Clemson Tigers at the end of that season. So that game had a lot of ramifications, Gary, for not only Alabama but the Clemson Tigers as well.
It sure did, and I know we're going down memory lane a little bit, folks.
That's great, and I love it.
Yeah, I do too. But the fact that we're going to air that game this weekend, it got me thinking. I knew Scott would be right in line with me. That was a magical season. It really was. And I know it didn't end the way that Alabama fans would have liked it to have ended. They got T-bowed in the fourth quarter of that dramatic SEC championship game. But then that set the table for that perfect season of 2009. But, I look back on that season because at that point, Scott, you remember, again, that game. What a magical game because it was all new then. I mean, even with Saban, Alabama started 6-2 in 2007, blew out Tennessee at home, but then the textbook gate, which was a crock of crap, if you ask me still, and that the NCAA officially took some wins away from Saban who had nothing to do with that. Alabama got hammered again for something that was pretty much out of their control. But anyway, they finished 7-6, have to win the Independence Bowl over Colorado to get to 7 wins. And that next year, again, I know we all anticipated them being better, but for that team to get to 12-0 that year, and along the way, you had the Clemson win, you had the blackout game against Georgia September 27th, which I think really put Alabama on the national map. And then by that time, they jumped to number 2 in the country and even got to number 1 later in the year. But I want to ask you, since we're kind of reminiscing about that season, Scott, there are some games that I really remember, like Clemson, like Georgia, like Auburn, 36-0, snapping the 6-game losing streak. A game that I don't remember much about. In fact, I was there, but Alabama, just looking at the schedule, Alabama beat Kentucky 17-14. on October the 4th. Yeah. And I can't even remember much about that game other than it was tight. What do you remember about that game?
Well, Glenn Coffey had an 80-yard run on the first play. And I remember Alabama was starting fast back then. They came out of the gate ready to go. And first play of the game, Glenn Coffey ran 80 yards for a touchdown. And, the Tulane game, too, the second game, not to backtrack, but the second game, that was a struggle, too, after they beat Clemson came back and kind of really struggled in that one. And they also struggled against Ole Miss, too, for the most part. Jevin Sneed was the quarterback for them, and Brandon Bolden was a tailback that finally, that was the first time Alabama trailed all year when Ole Miss scored. But, they jumped up on Kentucky and then just kind of held on. And this was after, I think they were still learning how to win big games.
They just beat Georgia the week before, Yeah,
and hadn't quite learned how to handle success, and kind of, you're still trying to learn how to win and what it takes to win every week. And but they found themselves. They went to Knoxville and absolutely obliterated Tennessee on a Saturday night in front of the 1998 national championship team. Tennessee was they were honoring that team. I was on the sideline for that one too, Gary, and then as that year went on, confidence started to build, and you started to realize, this is not a one-hit wonder. And I think it was Western Kentucky. Correct me if I'm wrong. I was actually at the Florida-Georgia game when Alabama won that game, and that rolled them to number one. I remember coming back from Jacksonville, headed back to Florida, and the polls came out, and Alabama was officially number one in the country again. And I was sitting there in the car going, wow, man, they're number one in the country. And you know what? That started a streak that is now the longest in college football history. Bama has been ranked number one at some point in the year every single season since that day.
Yeah, it was actually Arkansas State, Scott, but your points, State. Yeah, that season, I'm glad we're kind of going down this memory road, because
I love it, man. That's great.
That season was so special. And I know obviously you remember the 2009 season, because that's a perfect season and that's Saban's first national championship. But the foundation was laid in 2008, and you mentioned several of them. But the number of huge wins that year and wins that got monkeys off their collective backs. First of all, to beat Clemson in that first game when you're nearly a 10-point underdog, to go to Georgia when really at that point in time, remember that was Mark Richt? Well, they were on a roll, and they were, I think, number 2 or 3 at the time. Nobody gave Alabama a chance that game.
And Gary, I'll tell you this too: the one that stands out for me, and I wrote about that. It was at LSU.
Yeah, I was going to get there.
Why.
Yeah,
that game in 2008. Let me paint the picture. LSU was the defending national champion. It was Nick Saban's also first time to go back to Baton Rouge. And I have been in a lot of environments. I know you have too. And there's been some more intense environments afterwards. But that day, that stadium, that was one of the most, if not the most intense environments I had ever been in my life for Alabama making that trip to Baton Rouge that day. And you were just like, okay, if Alabama can find a way in this environment today. And you know what? That game went to overtime. Julio had an incredible game. Rashad Johnson, I think, picked off 3 balls, returned 1 for a pick 6. And Alabama beat the defending national champion. And it was that day, that was the changing of the guard in the SEC West, because LSU had dominated Alabama up to that point for most of the millennium. And so winning that game in Tiger Stadium, beating the defending national champs, that's when you knew, you know what, Alabama has a chance to be great moving forward. And I will never forget that game, because I think the Georgia win and the LSU win that year, I think they set the cornerstone for where we are today. Really do believe that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, again, we've rattled them all, folks, but the big wins that season. Again, remember, folks, if you're young and you're a teenager, all you might remember is just Alabama's been good ever since you can remember. But for older fans like Scott and myself, that season, Christmas came early. Again, to beat Clemson, to beat Georgia, to win at Tennessee, to win in Baton Rouge. And you're right, that game sent a message that Alabama was on par with LSU. And then to cap it off after losing 6 games in a row to Auburn. There was a time when Alabama fans couldn't have imagined losing 2 or 3 in a row to Auburn. But after a 6-game losing streak, not only did Saban make a statement in that game, 10-0 at half, 36-0 Tuberville was done. The series turned just like that. But to win it in a fashion that at that point in time you just weren't used to seeing Iron Bowls be one-sided. Even that 6-game winning streak, Auburn struggled to win a lot of those games, and to win it 36-0, Scott, that was an exclamation point on that season. That there's a new hey boys, there's a new sheriff in the SEC, right?
I'll tell you what's funny too, Gary. Living in Tuscaloosa in 06, you and I had so many great conversations. I remember standing in a TV station and doing a couple of appearances with you, and you and I sitting there talking, going, what is this program ever going to get back? The 2006 season was so frustrating from just a million perspectives. And, you had expansion in the stadium. You're looking at possibly some great things happening in the 06 season. You just didn't match up, losing to Tennessee, losing to LSU, losing to Auburn. And we were so frustrated. And then and you and I would talk about it. Is this program ever going to get, back to where it needs to get? And then we found out that, through a lot of great contacts and through a lot of investigative journalism, that Nick Saban was going to be the head coach at Alabama. And then the optimism, you just knew it. You just knew Nick Saban at Alabama was going to be the perfect marriage, and that it wasn't a question of if they were going to win titles. It was a question of when are they going to win titles. And the whole mindset changed. And but when it manifested itself on the field in the 2008 season, you just knew another run was inevitable. But I don't even think in 08 we could sit back here a decade later and go, man, 5 national titles during that time span. I mean, no one would have thought that. I think Alabama fans would have been happy with 1 or 2. But to have 5 national titles that 2008 season, it's absolutely freaking remarkable. It's one of the greatest achievements in college football history.
It really is. And to get through that regular season 12-0 against that schedule was phenomenal. And then the next week, after beating Auburn 36-0,
painful loss.
Yeah, and it was. And it showed that Alabama had climbed the mountain, but they weren't quite ready to stick the flag in the ground on top. Because say what you want about Tim Tebow as a pro quarterback, he proved again on December 6, 2008, why he was one of the greatest college football players of all time. And I know people talk about him throwing the ball. He made a couple throws in that game when Alabama led in the fourth quarter that were perfect throws, where Florida was defended perfectly, and he put the ball the only place it could be put to be caught, and Florida, came back to beat Alabama and went on to win the national championship. So Alabama quite wasn't ready to slay the giant in that one, but they did the next year. But what a great game that was. I remember, you probably feel the same way, Scott. I mean, I don't know. I've gotten older, but at that point in time with what had happened that season, I remember being in that Georgia Dome prior to number 2 Florida. Remember, Alabama was number 1. As you said, it was Alabama was undefeated number 1. Remember, Florida had lost at home to Ole Miss. And Tim Tebow promised.
That was.
Yeah, but I remember having butterflies down on the field before that game.
Yeah, that game, it stands out. And listen, Gary, I can still remember the drive back to Birmingham after that game was over. I mean, that was one of the most painful defeats ever because, you hadn't been in that situation as the number 1 team with a chance to go play for the national title, and you get beat and you play great. It was just wasn't anything Alabama did. Florida was just incredible. Tebow's touchdown passes, 3 of them came on third down. Third down and 10 were third and longer. Third and 10 and longer were 2 of the touchdown passes. And then Dante Hightower had a face mask penalty on Jeff Demps that would have stopped the drive, kept the drive alive. But then the elation the next season by not just beating that same Florida team, because make no mistake about it, that 2009 Florida team, and I talk to Florida people all the time, that was the best Florida team in school history. They had everybody back that year. They were undefeated. Florida's never had an undefeated team in the history of the school, and that was their best shot. And Alabama ended Tebow's career there. Everybody remembers the crying and all that. And Tebow was what a great competitor. But Florida has never been the same since that loss in Atlanta against Alabama in 2009.
Oh, there's no doubt. That 2008 game set the stage, and in 2009, boy, the it was passed from Florida to Alabama as the dominant program in this league. Hey, you know what? We got to get to the break, Scott. You're normally with us on Mondays. I think we just started a new segment. I think while we're doing, in this COVID-19 outbreak, I think every Monday, we normally do 2 segments with Scott. I think every Monday we will take one of those segments and relive a season in Alabama football. You and I are both historians. We both go way back. I'll just pick out a season. And we'll just go back and relive that season. I'm not talking about just the Saban era either. I'm talking about the good, bad, and the ugly. I mean, we'll do some stuff from
that's right.
We'll do some stuff from Dubose, and we'll do some stuff from Shula, and we'll do some of the great games with seasons with Coach Bryant and Coach Perkins and Stallings. I think that'll be fun, man. Let's do that. Let's just.
I love it.
I'll text you the night before what season we're gonna relive, and we'll just break it down like we broke down this one. I think that was great, and I had forgotten just what a magical. Even though Alabama didn't win a championship that year, other than the SEC West. But what a great season that 2008 season was. That was so much fun, man.
So much fun. It's been a lot of fun since, too, hasn't it, buddy?
It has been. Well, buddy, I tell you what, we got to get to the break, but that we kind of stumbled into something here, and on Monday I'll pick out another season and we'll break it down. How about that?
Well, I think the listeners really probably enjoyed that, and it's good to go back and talk about those things. I'm glad Tide 100 is going to play those upcoming games. I think people get a kick out of that, Gary, and I think we need to hear more of that moving forward. Really enjoyed that segment, brother. Thank you.